How to speak like a leader, communicate with power and authority. Introduction. The silent power of your voice. Most people underestimate the power of their voice. We're not just talking about the sound produced by the vocal cords, but the ability to convey authority, respect, clarity, and connection simply by speaking. From the moment we open our mouths, we're communicating more than just words. We're revealing how we think, how we feel, and most importantly, who we truly are. At that moment, it's no longer just about what we say, but how we say it. Tone, pauses, confidence, intention. All of these elements combine to create an invisible yet real presence that others perceive and respond to. The voice is the most direct vehicle to the hearts and minds of others. When you speak, you are influencing others, whether to inspire, lead, collaborate, or simply to be heard. But this power isn't obvious to everyone, and not everyone uses it consciously. Most people speak without realizing that their communication style is shaping the course of their relationships, their careers, their leadership, and their entire lives. Speaking like a leader doesn't mean using complicated words or sounding imposing. It means conveying with every word an energy that generates confidence, clarity, and direction. Great leaders aren't remembered just for what they said, but for how they made their listeners feel. In their voices, there was something beyond the content. There was certainty, there was connection, there was purpose. That's why the first step to speaking like a leader is understanding that your voice isn't just a means of expression. It's a tool of power. Every conversation, every speech, every public or private intervention is an opportunity to exercise leadership. You don't need a title or a position to start leading. It's all about how you communicate. Leadership doesn't always shout. Sometimes it barely whispers. But when it does so with conviction, it's heard everywhere. Your voice can open doors or close them. It can build bridges or erect walls. It can ignite enthusiasm or extinguish it completely. What kind of voice are you using? Are you letting fear, insecurity, or doubt seep into your words? Or are you using your voice with purpose, inner strength, and presence? Speaking with authority isn't about imposing yourself, but about reflecting a clear inner structure, a determined mindset, and a pure intention. Every time you speak, you're sending a message about yourself, even if you're not aware of it. And that message has a weight, a resonance that people pick up on even if they can't explain it. That's why it's so important to learn to use your voice with intention, technique, and authenticity. When someone speaks like a leader, they don't need to raise their voice. Their tone is firm yet calm. Their message is clear, direct, and free of unnecessary embellishment. They don't seek to impress, but to make an impact. They don't seek attention, but connection. And they achieve this because their communication is aligned with their inner purpose. This alignment is perceived as coherence, and coherence is one of the most respected qualities in a leader. No one follows someone who says one thing and conveys another. But everyone gravitates towards someone who speaks from a solid center, because that generates a sense of security, direction, and clarity amidst the noise. Most of us grew up learning to speak, but almost no one taught us how to communicate with power. In school, we were evaluated on what we said, but not on how we said it. At work, we are listened to for our results, but rarely trained to speak with true influence. And yet, the most effective leaders are those who master this art. They know when to speak and when to be silent. They know how to modulate their voice according to the situation. They know how to say a lot with few words, because they have understood that the power of the voice lies not in its volume, but in the intention behind it. When your message springs from truth, from experience, and from a clear decision, your voice becomes a transformative force. You don't have to pretend or copy other people's styles. You just have to discover your own leadership voice and dare to use it. Throughout this audiobook, you'll discover how to speak like a leader in diverse situations. From everyday conversation to important presentations, from constructive criticism to motivation during challenging times. You'll learn to recognize the invisible elements that give a voice authority without the need to shout. You'll see that it's not about innate talent, but about conscious practice. You don't need to change your essence, but rather learn to express it with greater clarity and presence. Because every time you speak, you have the opportunity to influence, to inspire, to guide. And that opportunity, if you seize it well, can change your life and the lives of others. Speaking like a leader isn't an act of ego, it's an act of service. It's putting your voice at the service of an idea, a purpose, a transformation. It's daring to say what others keep silent, but doing so with respect, intelligence, and empathy. It's turning every word into a bridge to understanding and action. It's not about sounding perfect, but about sounding genuine. About speaking from the heart, but with structure. About inspiring, but also about guiding. Because a true leader doesn't just communicate, but creates impact, even with their silence. And that impact begins now with your decision to make your voice your most powerful leadership tool. But before we continue, tell us what city you're listening to this audiobook from, and if this message resonates with you, subscribe to the channel now. That way you'll make sure you don't miss any content that nourishes your mind and brings you closer each day to the life you truly deserve. There's no time to lose. Now let's continue. Chapter 1. Speak so that they feel you, not just hear you. Speaking to be heard is easy. We do it every day. We communicate with family, colleagues, clients, and friends. We say what we think, share ideas, give instructions, or answer questions. But speaking to be felt, to leave a mark, to bring about change in the listener, that's a different story. That's the level at which a true leader communicates. Because the goal isn't just to fill the space with words, but to penetrate people's minds and hearts. It's about ensuring that even after your voice has fallen silent, your message continues to resonate in the other person's consciousness. That's the difference between an ordinary speaker and a communicator who leads. The former seeks to be understood. The latter seeks to be remembered. People easily forget facts, figures, and lengthy explanations. But they never forget how you made them feel. And this isn't just a pretty phrase, it's a biological truth. The human brain retains information associated with emotion better than others. That's why truly inspiring leaders not only master the content but also know how to deliver it with powerful emotional resonance. They speak from experience, passion, and clarity. They aren't afraid to show vulnerability if it connects them with their audience. They aren't afraid to use a personal story if it helps convey a universal truth. Because they understand that emotion is the vehicle that carries the message to the listener's deepest place. Speaking to be felt means not simply seeking applause, but transformation. You don't speak to impress, but to provoke reflection, to open possibilities, to ignite something within the other person. This requires courage because it means abandoning empty rhetoric, soulless technicalities, and predictable phrases. It requires putting a part of yourself into every word. It requires daring to be clear, even when clarity makes people uncomfortable. It requires not hiding your values behind neutral language. It requires taking the risk of leaving a mark, knowing you won't always please everyone. But if you speak from authenticity, from a solid vision and a clear purpose, you will be remembered. And even more, you will be followed. A leader doesn't speak to fill the silence. They speak to ignite a spark. And that spark isn't ignited with cold data or mechanical speeches. It's ignited with truth, with intention, with humanity. There are people who, in just a few minutes, are capable of moving hundreds, even thousands, because every word they utter is imbued with meaning. There is no improvisation without purpose. Every pause, every glance, every inflection in their tone carries a message. And even if not all listeners are communication experts, they all perceive it. Because when someone speaks from a place of authenticity, their voice transcends barriers and reaches the very core of the other person. That is speaking to be felt. The difference between speaking like a technician and speaking like a leader lies in the emotional impact. A technician can explain precisely. A leader touches the soul. And that's not a gift reserved for a select few. It's a skill that can be learned, that can be practiced. Start by asking yourself before you speak, what do I want this person to feel when they hear me? What do I want them to remember? What transformation do I want to plant with my words? When you speak with that intention, your message changes. It's no longer just about what you want to say, but about what the other person needs to receive. And that difference is what transforms an ordinary speech into an unforgettable experience. The greatest speeches in history are not remembered for their length, nor even for their logic, but for the impact they had. From political leaders to spiritual orators, they all understood this truth. If you can make someone feel something profound, that emotion will be etched in their memory forever, and they will associate your voice with that experience. That is what gives true authority. Not the position, not formal power, but the ability to stir genuine emotions. The voice of a leader who feels deeply has a multiplying power. It changes attitudes, it changes the emotional climate, it even changes the vision of what is possible. And you have that ability. You just need to start using it consciously. To make others feel you, you must first feel yourself. You cannot inspire if you are not inspired. You cannot spark enthusiasm if you speak from a place of apathy. You cannot ignite confidence if you yourself are plagued by doubt. Your emotional energy seeps into your tone, your rhythm, your gaze. That's why the most important preparation before speaking is not memorizing words, but aligning your emotion with your intention. What motivates you to say this? Why is this important to you? What transformation do you wish to bring about in the other person? When your emotions are aligned with your purpose, Your voice becomes a magnetic force that attracts attention, respect, and action. In a world saturated with words, what people need is authenticity. A leader's voice stands out because it doesn't seek to please but to serve. Because it doesn't hide behind masks, but dares to show itself as it truly is. Because it doesn't use words to inflate its ego, but to uplift others. And that kind of communication is unforgettable. It leaves a mark. It's felt in the body, in the skin, in the soul. And that's why it transforms. Because when someone speaks from that place, others listen with their whole being. Not just with their ears, but with open hearts. And in that instant, leadership ceases to be a theory and becomes a living experience. An experience that begins with your voice. Chapter 2. Authority begins in your voice. Authority isn't always accompanied by a title or visible hierarchy. Often, true authority is perceived long before someone shows a credential, signs a document, or makes an important decision. Authority begins with the voice. In that first instant when someone speaks, the atmosphere changes. Not because of shouting or exaggerated gestures, but because the energy with which they speak conveys something unmistakable. Presence, clarity, and conviction. Authority isn't imposed, it's projected. And the voice is the most direct channel for doing so. From the very first sound, others sense whether the person knows what they're talking about, whether they're confident in their message, and whether they deserve their attention. And they do so almost unconsciously, because the human brain is designed to identify leadership signals from the voice, from the way a sentence is articulated, from the certainty or doubt conveyed by the tone. To develop a powerful voice, the first ingredient is clarity. And this goes beyond simply speaking with good diction. Clarity means that your message leaves no room for confusion. That your words come through cleanly, without double meanings or unnecessary embellishments. That every sentence has a purpose and a direction. When you speak clearly, you don't need to say much. A single precise phrase is enough to make an impact. And this clarity doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of thinking before you speak, of knowing exactly what you want to say, of structuring your ideas intentionally. People follow those who clarify the path, not those who complicate it. That's why an authoritative voice isn't the one that talks the most, but the one that illuminates the most. The second component is rhythm. The rhythm of your voice determines whether people can follow you, whether they connect with you, whether your message flows or becomes a barrier. A suitable rhythm conveys confidence. It's like an internal compass that sets the pace of the conversation. When you speak too quickly, you sound anxious, disorganized, out of control. When you speak too slowly, you can seem insecure or distracted. But when you find a steady, unhurried, precise rhythm, your message takes on another dimension. Rhythm also allows you to use silence as a resource. Strategic pauses reinforce what you say. They allow the words to breathe, the listener to process, the message to settle. And that sense of control over time generates respect. Because it shows that you're not in a hurry to fill the space, but rather that you're comfortable in it. Then comes intention. Intention is the invisible force that gives meaning to your words. You can say the same phrase with different intentions and each will have a different effect. Intention is felt in the tone, the energy, the gaze. It's not the same to say, "I need you to trust me," from fear as it is from certainty. It's not the same to say, "This is important," from obligation as it is from passion. People may not remember your exact words, but they will always remember the intention they perceived. That's why speaking with authority involves aligning what you say with why you say it. Coherence between content and intention creates impact. If your words and your inner energy are in harmony, your voice becomes a legitimate tool of power. And finally, there's energy. Your voice carries your emotional energy. If you're tense, it will show. If you're inspired, that will too. Energy can't be faked. You can fake a smile, but you can't hide a misaligned inner vibration. And that vibration comes through with every word. Vocal authority doesn't come from sounding loud, but from sounding whole. From speaking from a centered, focused, and clear emotional state. When you're aligned with yourself, your energy flows naturally. Your voice becomes more resonant, firmer, and more engaging. And that's not about having a perfect tone of voice. It's about being emotionally present, having clarity of purpose, and taking care of your inner state before you speak. An authoritative voice is the result of inner work. You can't sound confident if you're not connected to your truth. You can't lead others if you haven't learned to lead your own mind. And that's why many people fail to project authority, even if they have good ideas or experience. Because they haven't trained their communication from within. And without that work, the voice weakens, fragments, and loses strength. In contrast, when someone cultivates mental clarity, conscious intention, inner rhythm, and aligned energy, their voice transforms. It becomes an extension of their leadership. And instead of demanding respect, they earn it naturally. All of this doesn't mean you should force a voice that isn't yours. On the contrary, the true power of your voice lies in its authenticity. It's not about sounding like someone else, but about discovering your best vocal version, the one that reflects your essence, your character, your vision. And that's achieved through practice, attention, and training. You don't have to become an actor. You have to become a leader who is conscious of how they use their voice. Someone who understands that every conversation is an opportunity to assert their presence, build trust, and generate transformation. Because every time you speak, you are shaping your influence. And when your voice becomes clear, rhythmic, intentional, and energetic, you become someone who not only says things but leaves a lasting impression. Chapter 3: Tone, Volume, and Pauses, the Invisible Weapons of a Leader. Mastering tone, volume, and pauses doesn't come from improvisation or chance. It's an art cultivated through conscious self-observation, a commitment to continuous improvement, and a genuine desire to make an impact with integrity. Many leaders believe that simply having something important to say is enough, but they don't realize that how they say it can either enhance or completely destroy their message. And that's where working on vocal awareness becomes crucial. It's not just a matter of technique, but of presence. Of truly being in the moment, connected to the purpose of what you're saying, attentive to your audience's reactions, reading the atmosphere, and adapting precisely. This ability to adjust on the fly, to choose when to change pace, when to raise or lower the volume, when to hold a longer pause than expected, is what transforms ordinary communication into a transformative experience. Few people understand that tone is also an emotional vehicle. It's like an undercurrent that sweeps the listener along without them even noticing. The tone you use to tell a story can evoke compassion or rejection. The tone you use to give an instruction can inspire cooperation or generate resistance. The tone you use to celebrate an achievement can create motivation or leave someone feeling invisible. And this happens all the time. It's not optional. You're always conveying something even when you don't intend to. That's why a conscious leader works on their tone like an artist works on their palette of colors. They study it, listen to it, and refine it. They learn to play with warmth, firmness, closeness, or distance. They know when to use a tone that invites reflection and when to use one that propels action. And they do so not from manipulation but from empathy. Because they understand that every emotion they convey with their voice is a bridge to the other person. And volume, that much misunderstood resource, is more than just intensity. It's projected intention. You don't need to shout to have authority. In fact, the world's most influential leaders often speak softly. But their voices are full of determination. They speak with their whole bodies, with the conviction of someone who believes in what they say. That's heard. It's felt. A well-projected volume without aggression generates magnetism. It's not the same to raise your voice out of a lack of control as it is to raise it with intention. In the first case, it's perceived as a threat. In the second, as clarity. And the same is true of strategic whispers. Sometimes, lowering the volume at the exact moment forces the listener to pay closer attention, to lean in, to connect. Because the sudden change in dynamics breaks the inertia, introduces a subtle tension that makes the words carry more weight. That's the difference between speaking out of habit and speaking strategically. And at the heart of it all is silence. The most powerful of all resources because it is the least used. Many fear silence. They think it is an uncomfortable void that must be filled. But a true leader understands that silence also communicates. That it can be more eloquent than any word. That a well-timed pause after a strong statement can make the difference between that phrase going unnoticed or being etched in memory forever. Silence allows time for reflection. It allows the message to breathe. And above all, it projects confidence. Those who can sustain silence don't need embellishments to feel valid. They don't rush to justify what they say. They simply let the echo of their words speak for itself. In a world of constant noise, those who know when to be silent wield immense power. Furthermore, pauses also benefit the speaker. They allow them to reconnect with themselves, regain presence, and assess the impact they are having. A pause before continuing can help you change the course of a conversation, raise or lower the intensity, and regain emotional control if you are losing it. Pauses are spaces of power, not interruptions. And when used intentionally, they transform any speech into a work with rhythm, depth, and emotional weight. The best communicators are not those who speak the most, but those who generate the most meaning with the fewest words. And that is only possible when each word is framed by conscious pauses, by silences that support the message and allow each idea to blossom with clarity. These invisible weapons, tone, volume, and pauses, don't need technology, they don't require grand stages, they don't depend on any external resources. They're with you all the time. You just need to activate them consciously. They require practice, yes. But more than that, they require a clear intention. The intention to communicate with presence, to lead with authenticity, to transform through your words. When you make these resources a natural extension of your communication style, your voice becomes a powerful tool that goes beyond the content. Because people may forget what you said, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And you achieve that not only with words, but with what lies behind them. With the tone you use, with the strength you project, with the silences you choose to hold. The difference between an ordinary speaker and a high-impact communicator lies not in vocabulary, but in vocal energy. In how they command the listener's attention without demanding it. In how they modulate intensity to generate an emotional rhythm. In how they create a captivating sound experience. And that's not a mystical talent. It's a skill that can be trained. It requires a willingness to listen to yourself, to correct yourself, to refine your technique. To understand that your voice is much more than a channel for words. It's an instrument of emotional leadership. And when you use that instrument masterfully, your message doesn't just arrive. It stays. It settles in the other person's memory. Because you made them feel. Because you captivated them with something deeper than the content. With the command of your vocal presence. That is the essence of transformative leadership. The kind that is exercised not through noise, but through the silent power of the unseen. Chapter 4. Connect before you convince. Before convincing someone, you must first touch their inner world. Not with cold logic, but with the emotion that drives them. Because human decisions are rarely rational in origin. They are emotional. They are based on unresolved needs, silent pains, accumulated frustrations, and latent desires. A leader who understands this doesn't seek to impose ideas. They seek to connect. And that connection doesn't arise from the most elaborate argument, but from the ability to speak to the other person from their reality, from their emotional language. True persuasion begins with empathy. And empathy requires presence, listening, and the willingness to step outside your own discourse to enter the other person's experience. When someone feels understood before you try to convince them, they lower their defenses, open their mind, and, more importantly, open their heart. That's the key. Before trying to move someone else, you have to move toward them. You have to speak directly to their pain. Not from a place of judgment, but from a place of recognition. Show them that you see them, that you know what they're going through, that you understand what they've felt. This isn't achieved with empty motivational phrases or promises of change. It's achieved with emotional truth. With words that resonate because they don't come from the intellect, but from human understanding. When you speak from that place, you don't need to embellish too much. Because the other person feels that you're not trying to sell them something, but rather to accompany them on their journey. That creates a powerful, deep connection, one that's hard to break. And from that connection, then, yes, you can begin to build influence. But connecting doesn't mean pleasing. It doesn't mean saying what the other person wants to hear. It means saying what they need to hear, but in a tone that makes them feel seen. You can talk about hard truths, necessary changes, unavoidable challenges. But if you do it from a place of emotional closeness, the message gets through. Because you're not attacking, you're supporting. Leadership isn't a battle of arguments, it's a dance of emotions. And in that dance, the first step is always recognition. I know how you feel, I've been there, I understand what's going on inside you. That phrase doesn't have to be said literally, but it must be felt in your energy, in your voice, in your intention. When the other person perceives it, something essential happens. Trust emerges. And without trust, there is no possible influence. Great leaders are experts at identifying their audience's emotional needs before they even begin to speak. They don't launch into communication based on their own agenda, but rather on what the other person needs to hear in that moment. They ask questions. They listen. They observe. They sense the atmosphere. And once they detect the pain point, they address it respectfully. They don't force it, they don't exaggerate it, but they don't avoid it either. Because they understand that avoiding the other person's pain is avoiding the bridge of connection. And everything you avoid in the other person becomes distance. On the other hand, when you name it, you illuminate it. And in doing so, the other person feels relief. They feel they are not alone. They feel that someone is giving voice to what they couldn't express. That experience is profoundly liberating. And from there, influence flows naturally. Often, a conversation becomes transformative not because of the solutions it offers, but because of the emotional relief it generates. A leader who connects on an emotional level is like a mirror that reflects without distortion. They don't judge, they don't immediately correct, they simply show. And that showing allows the other person to reorganize their inner world. That's why, before convincing, you have to validate. Validating isn't accepting everything as true, it's simply saying, your experience makes sense. From there, and only from there, can a new narrative be built. Convincing isn't pushing, it's inviting. And the best invitations are made with deep empathy. True connection happens when your voice resonates with the other person's emotions. It's not a technique, it's an attitude. It's not an external strategy, it's an internal disposition. It involves wanting to understand before being understood. It involves being willing to relinquish control of the message to make space for the other person's message. And paradoxically, when you do that, your message becomes more powerful. Because it's no longer just yours. It's a co-creation between what you bring and what the other person needs. That's the meeting point where real influence is born, at the intersection of your intention and their need. When both align, transformation occurs. Speaking directly to another person's pain, frustration, or desire requires sensitivity. You can't use an emotional hammer. You must approach gently, as if treading on sacred ground. Because every person is battling invisible battles. And if you touch that space with respect, with honesty, with care, you gain something invaluable, permission to guide. People don't follow the loudest voice, they follow the one who understands them best. And when they feel you understand what no one else did, they give you their attention, their trust, and eventually, their loyalty. Not because you manipulated them, but because you saw them. And being seen is one of the deepest human needs. When you develop this ability to connect, every conversation becomes an opportunity to build bridges. And these bridges don't just serve to influence things in one direction. They also allow you to transform in the process. Because by connecting with the other person, you also access parts of yourself that were dormant. It's an exchange. A give and take. Mutual growth. That's why authentic leadership isn't about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions, maintaining the necessary emotional space, and speaking the truth that the other person needs to hear, even if it hurts. Because when you do it with compassion, that truth doesn't destroy, it liberates. Connecting before convincing isn't just a preliminary step. It's the core of effective communication leadership. It's what transforms a message into a bond, a conversation into an experience, an idea into a seed that can grow within the other person. If you achieve this, you don't need to pressure people to follow you. They will follow you because they feel you understand them better than anyone else. And that feeling is priceless. That feeling is what makes the difference between being heard and being remembered, between talking for the sake of talking and speaking like a true leader. Chapter 5. Be clear, not perfect. Clarity is the quiet power that underpins any effective communication. In a world where many strive to sound flawless, a true leader is distinguished by their ability to be clear, direct, and honest. They don't need to embellish excessively or hide behind elaborate language to impress. Because they understand that perfect words don't always have an impact. In fact, it's often counterproductive. What truly resonates is authenticity, the truth spoken with intention and simplicity. When you speak from that place, people not only understand you, but they believe you. And that credibility is infinitely more powerful than a flawless speech that rings hollow. Striving for perfection in speech is a trap of the ego. It makes us think that if we eliminate all mistakes, if every word is perfectly chosen, then we will be more persuasive. But people don't respond to perfection, they respond to emotion. And emotion arises from reality, from humanity, from imperfection. Clarity, on the other hand, is an act of generosity. It means that you are thinking about the other person as you speak. That you are willing to make your message accessible, digestible, useful. You don't hide behind technicalities or ambiguities to appear more intelligent. You express yourself in a way that allows the other person to take away something valuable. That generosity is what connects. That clarity is what transforms. When you speak clearly, you eliminate the unnecessary. You get to the point. You name what matters. That requires courage. Because clarity often involves discomfort. Telling the truth can hurt. But if you do it with the right intention, if you do it with respect and humanity, that truth becomes liberating. It's like lifting a veil. People feel that finally someone dares to speak clearly, to not sugarcoat the obvious, to not disguise reality. And in that act they find trust. Because they know you're not striving for perfection, but committed to the truth. That's leadership, having the courage to say what many think but few dare to express. It's not about speaking without a filter or resorting to brutality. It's about finding the most honest and, at the same time, most respectful way to communicate what's essential. That's the magic combination, clarity with intention. It's not what you say, it's the place from which you say it. When there's a genuine intention to help, to enlighten, to contribute, Even difficult messages are received with openness, because the other person senses that your clarity isn't a way to impose but a way to care, to avoid confusion, to get straight to the point, to save time, energy, and misunderstandings. This emotional efficiency is one of the great secrets of effective communication leadership. Many leaders lose authority by talking too much without saying anything of substance. They use convoluted language, beat around the bush, and repeat the same thing in different terms. And while it may sound nice, nothing sticks. Because there was no central idea, no clear intention, no defined direction. In contrast, leaders who know how to communicate effectively share one quality. Their words leave a mark because they are simple, direct, and truthful. They don't need to raise their voices or use complex phrases. They say what needs to be said, they say it well, and they say it with intention. This economy of language is not poverty, it is emotional intelligence. And it generates immediate respect. Clarity also sets you free. When you stop striving for perfection, you focus on what matters. The message. You stop worrying about how each word will sound and start wondering how the other person will feel listening. That's the crucial difference. The perfectionist communicator focuses on themselves. The clear communicator focuses on the other person. And that's noticeable. People can tell when you speak to prove something versus when you speak to serve. The former is tiresome, the latter inspires. Because in a world saturated with carefully crafted speeches, what's valued is the voice that speaks without masks, that reveals itself as it is, that isn't afraid to make mistakes, because it knows that the truth, spoken with good intentions, always carries more weight than empty embellishment. Clarity also requires that you have a clear message. You can't be clear outwardly if you're confused on the inside. That's why a good leader takes the time to organize their thoughts, to define what's essential, to ask themselves what they want to achieve with every word they say. They don't improvise from confusion, but rather from inner clarity. And that translates into coherence. Coherence is what keeps the message alive even after the voice fades. Because the other person doesn't just remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel. And clarity generates peace of mind, trust, and security. All of that stems from your ability to be clear with yourself first, and then with others. Don't be afraid to be simple. Simplicity is beautiful when it springs from truth. Many confuse simplicity with superficiality, but they are opposites. Simplicity arises from depth. It is the result of reflection, of eliminating the superfluous, of carefully choosing each word so that the other person understands effortlessly. That is true mastery, transforming the complex into something comprehensible. A leader is not there to complicate but to clarify, to help others see more clearly what was previously confusing. And that is achieved not with perfect phrases, but with real, human, direct messages. Speak as if your message were urgent, but not from anxiety, rather from intention. Make the other person feel that you are worth listening to because you are committed to their understanding, to them taking something useful away, to them not wasting time on unnecessary interpretations. When you do that, your voice becomes a beacon. It illuminates. It guides. And even if it doesn't sound perfect, it sounds honest. And honesty, in the art of speaking like a leader, is worth more than 1,000 embellishments. Because what truly transforms is not what sounds good, but what resonates in the other person's soul. And that is only achieved when you are clear, not perfect. Chapter 6. Verbal Leadership in Times of Stress. In moments of tension, when emotions run high and uncertainty fills the air, a leader's voice takes on a different weight. It is no longer simply a communication tool. It becomes an anchor, a guide that can calm or ignite, unite or divide. Therefore, in difficult times, verbal leadership is not about imposing, but about supporting. And supporting means speaking firmly without losing respect. It means maintaining inner control even when the external world seems to be crumbling. A leader who masters their voice in the storm conveys confidence, not because they have all the answers, but because they know how to communicate from their core, from awareness, from intention. Speaking firmly is not synonymous with harshness. It means having clarity in the message and conviction in the stance, without resorting to aggression or rigidity. It means being able to say, "This is what we will do," without raising your voice. True firmness doesn't need volume, it needs presence. And presence is built from within. A leader who is present in moments of tension doesn't react impulsively, they respond with vision. Their voice becomes a refuge, not a trigger. Because they understand that the words they choose in that moment will be etched in their memory long after the event. People don't forget how they were spoken to in the midst of conflict. Therefore, every word must be carefully chosen, not coldly, but with emotional wisdom. Respect is the foundation of any difficult conversation. Even when tough decisions must be made, even when there are disagreements, respect is the invisible language that sustains the connection. No matter how firm your position is, if you deliver it respectfully, the other person senses it. And they may not agree with you, but they will listen. Because they perceive that your intention is not to defeat them, but to build. On the other hand, if you speak from judgment, from criticism, from a position of superiority, even the most valid arguments become sterile. Because people shut down when they feel attacked. But they open up when they sense that, even if the message is difficult, it comes from a place of humanity. Respect is the gateway to any uncomfortable truth. Maintaining verbal control in the midst of a crisis is a skill that can be developed. It requires awareness of your internal state. Because what often happens is not that the situation overwhelms us, but rather that we are unaware of how it affects us internally. A leader who is not self-aware may react with harshness, sarcasm, or impatience, without realizing the damage they cause. But when you learn to breathe before speaking, to choose your tone, to pause before responding, you become someone who conveys serenity even in chaos. And that serenity is not feigned. It is the result of inner work that is reflected in your voice. Because the voice is a mirror of the soul, and in difficult times, that mirror reveals who you truly are. It's not about avoiding conflict, but about knowing how to manage it verbally. Sometimes, as a leader, you have to say what no one wants to hear. Make unpopular decisions. Set boundaries. But there's a huge difference between doing so reactively and consciously. Conscious firmness doesn't need justification. It only needs to be expressed clearly and humanely. It's about being able to say, "This is non-negotiable," without hurting, humiliating, or imposing your will. It's about showing that there's a clear framework, a direction, but also an openness to listening. Because leading isn't about imposing silence. It's about knowing when to speak and how to do it so that even in the midst of tension, dialogue remains possible. Intonation, pauses, volume, everything communicates. In moments of tension, every subtle nuance of your voice is amplified. If you shout, you create resistance. If you remain silent for too long, you create uncertainty. If you speak without conviction, you convey insecurity. That's why mastering these invisible elements is so important. Sometimes a well-placed pause says more than an entire speech. Sometimes lowering your tone instead of raising it projects more authority. Because people don't just listen to your words, they listen to your energy. And if that energy is steady, firm, yet empathetic, you gain influence. Not by instilling fear, but by building trust. Trust is the true result of effective verbal leadership in challenging situations. And in all of this, there's something crucial. You don't have to have all the answers. Often, the greatest act of verbal leadership is honestly acknowledging that you don't know, that you're evaluating, that you need time. People don't expect you to be infallible, but they do expect you to be honest. Saying, "This is complex, but I'm here and we're going to find the best solution," has more power than any prepared speech. Because it connects with reality. Because it shows that you're in control of yourself, even if the environment isn't. And that's enough. Because ultimately, leadership isn't about having everything figured out. It's about having the ability to guide with your voice even when the path is uncertain. Finally, remember that in times of tension, silence also communicates. Knowing when to be quiet, when to listen, when to give space, is just as important as knowing how to speak. Not everything is resolved by talking more. Sometimes your silent presence is the most comforting thing. Sometimes active listening is worth more than 100 arguments. And other times, a single clear sentence, spoken with firmness and respect, can change the course of an entire situation. That's why the art of verbal leadership in difficult moments isn't about being perfect, but about being present. About using your voice as a beacon, not as a storm. And in that choice, in every word and in every silence, you build your true authority. Chapter 7. Stories that lead. Stories have been, since the dawn of humanity, the most powerful language of leadership. Before formal structures, rules, or even writing existed, tribal leaders guided their people through narratives. They recounted victories, warnings, and lessons learned. And in those stories, they conveyed not only information but also values, meaning, and vision. Today, although the world has changed, that truth remains intact. Stories move people more than arguments. A leader who knows how to tell stories doesn't need to impose. They simply inspire. Because good stories open the door to the heart before the mind. And once the heart is open, any message resonates more deeply. The power of a story lies not in the perfection of the narrative, but in its ability to connect with something human, universal, and intimate. It's not about inventing grand epics, but about sharing real or symbolic moments that evoke emotions. When a leader recounts how they failed and rose again, They don't just impart a lesson, they transmit hope. When they narrate how an ordinary person achieved something extraordinary, they don't just motivate, they empower. People don't want theories, they want to see themselves reflected. They want to hear something that tells them, I can do it too. Therefore, storytelling as a leader is not an embellishment or an aesthetic device. It is a tool for influence, mobilization, and genuine leadership. A well-told story has structure, rhythm, and soul. It begins by situating the audience. Where did it happen? Who was involved? What was the conflict? Then comes the development, the obstacles, the decisions, the emotions. And finally, the resolution, the change, the lesson, the transformation. But beyond the technical structure, what matters most is authenticity. Don't tell a story to impress, tell it to touch. Use your own voice with your own emotions. Let people feel that you are reliving the moment, not simply remembering it. When the story is lived by the storyteller, it is also lived by the listener. And that's where the magic happens, a deep emotional connection. Storytelling isn't just about inspiration, it's also about persuasion. Sometimes explaining a technical concept, a difficult decision, or a long-term vision becomes much clearer when illustrated with a story. The narrative grounds the concept, making it tangible. For example, if you need to convince a team to change their way of working, you can use a story that shows how another team made that change and what benefits they achieved. If you need someone to take on a difficult responsibility, you can share the story of someone who accepted that same challenge and grew from it. Stories don't push, they pull. They don't coerce, they seduce. And that's why they are so effective at persuading with elegance and depth. There are also stories that heal. In times of crisis, a leader who knows how to tell stories can restore hope, can help to reframe pain. Sharing how an organization overcame bankruptcy, how a person navigated loss and rebuilt their life, how a community rose up after a disaster, is not only inspiring, it's therapeutic. Because stories remind us that hardship can be overcome, that we are not alone, that others also felt fear, anguish, anger, and yet they persevered. And that, for the listener, is a message more powerful than any promise. It is an invitation to believe again, to trust, to act. The tone in which a story is told is also crucial. The same event can evoke indifference or emotion depending on how it's recounted. That's why a leader who is a storyteller carefully considers the rhythm, the pauses, and the silence. Sometimes, a pause just before the climax has more impact than any words. Sometimes, lowering one's voice at the height of tension conveys a restrained intensity that captivates. Other times, a smile at the end softens a difficult story and leaves a feeling of warmth. All these elements, when used intentionally, transform a simple anecdote into a transformative experience. And that's the difference between speaking and leading through words. Furthermore, stories are remembered, much more so than facts, arguments, or instructions. A good story stays in the memory because it sparks the imagination, engages emotions, and leaves a symbolic imprint. That's why a leader who wants to be remembered needs to become a storyteller. Not of just anything, but of what matters. Of what defines their vision, their values, their purpose. People don't follow abstract ideas. They follow stories that embody those ideas. When someone says, I follow that person because they inspired me with their experiences, they're talking about the leader's narrative power. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO, a teacher, a politician, or a parent. If you learn to tell meaningful stories, your influence multiplies. Finally, there's something fundamental. We all have stories that can lead. You don't need to have lived an epic journey to inspire. Simply look at your life, your mistakes, your achievements, your lessons learned, and share them honestly. Sometimes, a simple story, a conversation, an everyday decision, an unexpected gesture, can be more powerful than a grand epic tale. Because what connects isn't spectacle, it's truth. So look in your memory, in your experience, in your daily life. Your stories are there. And if you learn to tell them with intention, your voice won't just inform or motivate. Your voice will lead. Because you'll be speaking from a place where words cease to be noise and become a legacy. Chapter 8. Nonverbal language also leads. Leadership isn't just conveyed through words, it's embodied. And often what isn't said has more impact than what is spoken. Nonverbal communication is that silent yet powerful channel that accompanies, or betrays, the message we send. A leader who is aware of their body, their expression, their physical presence, has a communicative power that goes far beyond logic. Because people don't just hear what you say, they also observe how you say it. And in that coherence, or lack thereof, a large part of your credibility is defined. You can have an impeccable speech, but if your body doesn't accompany that speech with conviction, the words lose their power. On the other hand, when posture, gaze, gestures, and body tone support what is said, the message becomes congruent and therefore unforgettable. Posture is a silent declaration of how you position yourself in the world. A leader who slouches, who withdraws into themselves, who avoids taking up space, is unconsciously sending a message of insecurity, doubt, and retreat. In contrast, an upright, open, and present posture conveys authority without saying a word. It's not about appearing rigid or artificial, but about occupying your space with firmness and composure. Verticality in the body generates verticality in energy. You feel more present, more grounded, more aware. And others perceive this. In a room full of people, the one who maintains their posture with dignity is usually the one who attracts attention, even without speaking. Because the body communicates leadership long before the mouth opens. Eye contact is another crucial element. A firm, direct gaze that maintains eye contact without forcing it creates connection and trust. It's not about staring coldly, but about looking with presence, with genuine interest. When a leader looks into the eyes of their listener, they are saying, "I am with you. I am present. What I say, I also say to you." And that creates an invisible bridge of mutual attention. In contrast, avoiding eye contact, constantly looking away, or staring at the floor while speaking creates a feeling of disconnection, insecurity, and lack of commitment. Eye contact, when used well, has a magnetic power. It can calm, challenge, or inspire. It all depends on the intention behind it. Gestures amplify the message. A hand that emphasizes what's important, a movement that accompanies an emotion, a gesture that marks a pause, these have the power to add layers of meaning to a speech. Great speakers are not static. They use their bodies as instruments that interpret and reinforce what they are saying. But they do so naturally, not artificially. A leader doesn't need to exaggerate their gestures to be expressive. What they need is awareness. Knowing when a gesture adds clarity, when it distracts, when it supports, and when it interrupts. Hands, in particular, are an extension of thought. Used well, they can invite, contain, point, and protect. They are a form of communication as powerful as words. And then there's presence. That intangible quality some people possess, which you can feel in the air when they enter a room. Presence isn't about speaking loudly or imposing yourself. It's about being fully present in the moment, inhabiting the here and now without internal distractions. A leader with presence conveys confidence, calm, and authority. They don't need to prove anything because their very energy communicates certainty. Presence is cultivated through mindfulness, self-observation, and the decision to be where you are without rushing ahead or running away. It's a state of inner connection that radiates outward, and those who perceive it respect it. Nonverbal communication is also expressed through silence. The way a person tolerates silence reveals their level of inner control. Those who need to fill every second with words are often running away from themselves. In contrast, a leader who can pause, who can breathe mid-speech, who can sustain silence as part of the message, is conveying mastery and confidence. Silence, when used well, can speak louder than 1,000 words. It can mark a turning point. It can be a dramatic, reflective, or even emotional tool. But above all, it can be a declaration of security. I don't need to talk all the time to lead. My presence also communicates. Furthermore, nonverbal communication serves as a barometer of consistency. If what you say is courageous, but your body language shows fear, the message loses its power. If you speak of empathy, but your facial expression is rigid and distant, the emotional impact is diluted. In contrast, when there is alignment between verbal and nonverbal communication, people not only understand, they also believe. A leader's credibility is not earned solely through arguments, it is earned through congruence. And congruence is often expressed in the harmony between what is said and what is shown. Therefore, body language awareness is an indispensable tool for anyone who wishes to lead with integrity. Even in digital environments, where many interactions occur via video or screen, nonverbal language remains relevant. Posture in front of the camera, facial expression, tone of voice, and gestures continue to send signals. A leader who keeps their camera on, who looks directly into the lens, who speaks with expressive energy, is forging an emotional connection even across distances. Because human communication always has an emotional dimension. And emotions often enter through the senses before they enter through ideas. True leadership requires presence. It requires body awareness. It requires observing yourself when you enter a room, when you sit at a table, when you address a team. Your body is always saying something. Make it say something that supports your message. Because when you master your nonverbal communication, you don't just reinforce what you say. You reinforce who you are. And that authenticity is what others will follow without you having to ask. Chapter 9. Eliminate weak words, build strong sentences. Every word we choose when we speak is either a tool for building something or an invisible obstacle. In the realm of leadership, where every message has the potential to mobilize or stagnate, language must be honed with surgical precision. It's not about talking a lot, but about speaking with weight. That's why eliminating weak words and constructing strong sentences isn't just a matter of style, but a strategic decision that defines how you'll be perceived, as someone who leads or as someone who seeks approval. There are words and expressions that erode your authority even before you reach the main point. Filler words like you know what I mean, sort of, or like act like cracks in your message. They not only distract, but also reveal a lack of confidence that others immediately perceive. And when your confidence falters, so does your leadership. Unnecessary hesitation in language such as I think, maybe, I'm not really sure, perhaps, should be eliminated or replaced with expressions that convey clarity. A leader doesn't speak from assumption, but from decision. Even if they don't have all the answers, they express themselves with structure and purpose. Instead of saying, I'm not sure, but it could be that, you can say, with the current information, my interpretation is this. The content may be the same, but the way it's said completely changes the perception. The listener senses certainty, not hesitation. And that certainty is what builds respect. Unnecessary apologies are also silent enemies of authority. Phrases like, I'm sorry if I'm wrong, I'm sorry for saying this, I don't know if I should say this, but put the speaker on the defensive as if they were asking permission to exist. A leader doesn't apologize for having a well-formed opinion. They apologize when they've made a real mistake, not simply for expressing themselves. Speaking with authority doesn't mean being arrogant. It means speaking with courage, with respect for oneself and others. If you have something valuable to say it firmly without softening it with excuses that only dilute your message. Strong language isn't aggressive. It's clear, direct, and decisive. A leader who knows how to express themselves eliminates distracting phrases and uses structures that focus attention. Instead of saying, this is just my opinion, say, my point of view is this based on the following. Instead of saying, it might not be important, but say, this is relevant because it directly affects what we're building. The difference lies in using your voice as a vehicle for impact, not as a whisper seeking acceptance. Furthermore, powerful sentences stem not only from content but also from rhythm and delivery. A clear sentence, with a well-defined rhythm and a clear ending, has far more impact than an idea that drifts aimlessly. Speaking in complete sentences, avoiding rising intonation at the end, as if everything were a question, creates a sense of control and mastery of the subject. A falling intonation at the end of key phrases conveys confidence, and the listener feels you are in control. The tone, rhythm, and decisiveness with which you conclude an idea are just as important as the idea itself. In the context of leadership, even silence can carry more weight than a weak statement. Instead of filling a space with empty words, a leader knows when to pause, breathe, and then say something worthwhile. That pause tells the listener, what comes next is significant. And when the statement arrives, its impact is amplified. Pauses create anticipation. Powerful words confirm it. This is the balance of effective verbal leadership. Replacing empty words with active, direct verbs also transforms your discourse. Instead of saying, we'll try to do it, say, we're going to do it. Instead of, the idea would be to see if we can, say, the plan is this. Clear actions generate commitment. Vague language creates avoidance. A leader doesn't just guide with their thoughts, they lead with their words. Because words are action, direction, and clarity. A team follows someone who knows what they want to say and says it directly. Another key aspect is adapting your language to the listener's level of understanding, without losing impact. Speaking with authority isn't about speaking complicatedly. It's about speaking clearly. A great leader knows how to use simple words to express profound ideas. They don't need embellishments or technical jargon to impress. True authority is evident when you can explain a complex concept simply, without underestimating your audience's intelligence, but also without elevating yourself above them. Powerful words are those that resonate, that connect, that make an impact. And to do that, they must be understood. Eliminating weak words also means eliminating dependence on constant validation. Phrases like, don't you think so? Do you agree? Right? At the end of every statement, convey insecurity. It's as if you need someone else to legitimize your message. A leader listens but doesn't beg for approval with every word. They speak openly, yes, but also with conviction. They leave room for dialogue but without diluting their vision. Ultimately, crafting powerful sentences is a skill that requires cultivation. It's not about censoring yourself, but about refining your voice. Listen to yourself speak. Identify where your strength falters. Ask yourself if that word adds value or detracts from your message. If that turn of phrase affirms or weakens you. And then, little by little, replace, sharpen, and strengthen it. Every sentence is an opportunity to demonstrate presence, command, and intention. An authoritative discourse doesn't arise from constant improvisation, but from constant awareness. And with that awareness, your voice ceases to be merely a sound and becomes a tool for transformation. Because leading with powerful words is, in essence, leading with clarity of purpose. And that clarity is what the world needs to hear. Chapter 10. Persuading without manipulating. Influencing with integrity. Persuasion is not the same as manipulation. The difference lies in the intention and integrity with which the message is conveyed. A leader who communicates with power and authority doesn't need to resort to deception, exaggeration, or emotional pressure to influence. Their message convinces because it aligns with an inner truth, a clear vision, and a genuine intention to contribute. Effective persuasion doesn't feel like an external force pushing, but rather an internal invitation that awakens. The listener doesn't feel pushed to do something, but rather guided to see what they didn't see before. The key is understanding that people don't change their minds because they are forced, but because they feel seen, understood, and respected. When a leader persuades with integrity, they don't try to sound perfect or use empty techniques to impress. Their power lies in consistency, in the harmony between what they say, what they do, and what they stand for. This consistency builds trust, and trust is the fertile ground where persuasion flourishes. The message isn't just heard, it's felt. The person doesn't just understand your arguments, they perceive your intention. And when the intention is pure, the connection becomes natural. People don't want to be convinced. They want to feel free to decide. That's why a leader who influences with integrity speaks clearly, presents a powerful vision, and leaves room for others to choose freely. Authentic persuasion begins with knowing your audience, understanding their needs, pain points, desires, and fears. Not to exploit them, but to speak to them from a place of relevance. It's not about manipulating their emotions, but about connecting with them. Saying, "This matters to you because it directly impacts what you value most," is more powerful than any technical argument. People don't make decisions based solely on logic. They make them based on meaning. And a leader who knows how to communicate with meaning and purpose inspires without coercion. Because their message resonates with what the other person already feels, even if they haven't always been able to express it. It's also crucial to avoid the extremes of manipulative language. Phrases like, "If you don't do this, you'll regret it," "Everyone's already doing this, you're the only one missing," or "Trust me, there's no other option," might generate short-term results, but they erode trust in the long run. Pressure breeds resistance. Manipulated urgency breeds distrust. In contrast, a persuasive message delivered with integrity presents the unvarnished truth, shows the real benefits, acknowledges the potential risks, and then delivers the decision respectfully. This empowers the listener, making them feel not used. And that feeling fosters strong, lasting relationships built on mutual respect. Authenticity in voice is also an essential part of persuading with integrity. It's not enough to have good words. You need a presence to back them up. Tone, rhythm, the pauses between sentences, the energy with which the idea is expressed. Everything conveys an additional message. Are you being genuine or are you acting? And people, even if they can't always explain it, can tell when a leader is speaking from their core or from behind a mask. Persuading without manipulating requires emotional presence. It requires connecting with your message before delivering it. It requires believing in what you say and living it, not just repeating it. Another powerful element is having real evidence, authentic stories, data that backs up what you're saying, but above all, personal experience that confirms what you're proposing. Lived experiences, lessons learned, mistakes transformed into guidance, are more persuasive than any formula. Because they show that you're not speaking from theory but from practice. And that resonates. A leader who says, "This transformed me and that's why I'm sharing it," has more influence than one who simply recites someone else's formulas. Integrity is seen in the example, not just in the words. Furthermore, persuading with integrity also involves knowing when not to speak. Knowing when to be silent, observe, and allow the other person to reflect. Not every message needs to be delivered definitively. Sometimes, an idea left hanging, respectfully, has more power than constant insistence. Giving space is also a form of respect. And when you respect the other person's freedom, your influence multiplies. because the other person senses that you're not focused on a specific outcome, but rather on a vision worth considering. That changes everything. The language of authentic persuasion is clear, direct, without unnecessary embellishment or emotional manipulation. It's a language that invites, not pushes, that guides, not forces, that shows paths, not confines options. A leader who communicates in this way doesn't seek to convince everyone, but rather to deeply impact those who are ready to listen. And within that impact, they sow a seed of transformation that depends not on manipulation but on clarity. Finally, persuading with integrity also means accepting that not everyone will agree, and that's okay. The goal isn't to please everyone, but to remain true to a message that provides real value. When a leader detaches from the need for approval and focuses on serving with their words, their message is strengthened. People follow them not because they feel forced, but because they perceive them as authentic, approachable, and steadfast. That's the kind of influence that doesn't fade, because it doesn't stem from technique but from truth. And truth, spoken with intention, respect, and conviction, is the most powerful form of persuasion. Chapter 11. Adapt without losing your voice. Adapting without losing your voice is one of the most powerful and rare skills in the world of communicative leadership. It's the ability to read your audience, perceive their codes, their emotional state, their level of knowledge, and adjust the form of your message without sacrificing the essence of who you are or the truth you're conveying. It's not about changing the content to please, but about transforming the vehicle so that the content truly resonates. A leader who knows how to adapt their communication without diluting their authenticity achieves what many cannot, connecting with very different people while remaining true to themselves. The key is understanding that each audience has a rhythm, an emotional language, and a context that influences how they receive what they hear. And respecting that is part of speaking with authority. Some leaders mistakenly believe that authenticity means rigidity, that being authentic means repeating the same speech in the same way to everyone, in every situation. But that's not authenticity, it's disconnection. True authenticity is flexible because it's anchored in the core, not on the surface. It's not about changing your values or your purpose, but about finding the most effective way to express them depending on the context. A good communicator is like water. They maintain their essence but adapt to the shape of the container. They change the form, not the substance. And that allows their message to flow smoothly across mental and emotional boundaries. To achieve this, it's essential to develop active listening skills before every important conversation. Observe, ask questions, and sense the atmosphere before speaking. Ask yourself, what does this person or group need right now? How do they perceive the world? What language is familiar to them? What tone would open them up and what tone would shut them down? It's not about pleasing them, but about understanding their framework in order to choose the best path toward understanding. Speaking in the other person's emotional language isn't surrendering. It's leading intelligently. It's knowing that connection precedes persuasion, and that for the other person to hear your truth, they must first feel that you understand them. It's also important to recognize that the way you convey your message can change without altering its core content. You can be more informal or more structured, warmer or more direct, depending on who you're speaking to while still remaining true to yourself. Authenticity isn't about style, but intention. It's about the consistency between what you feel, think, and say. When that consistency is present, you can adapt your approach without anyone questioning your integrity. And that earns respect. People perceive that you're not just putting on an act, but intelligently adjusting to facilitate understanding. Another key element for adapting without losing your voice is knowing your non-negotiables. That is, being clear about which parts of your message, your stance, your vision are non-negotiable. Because only when you know what you won't sacrifice can you freely negotiate the rest. If you haven't defined your internal boundaries, it's easy to fall into the trap of diluting your message in an attempt to please others. But when you are firm internally, you can be flexible externally. You can move, adjust, redirect without losing yourself. That inner strength is what allows you to adapt without betraying yourself. And it's not just about words. It also involves adapting your energy, your presence, your pace, even your body language. If you're speaking to a technical team, you might need to be more analytical. If you're speaking to an emotional audience, you might need to be more narrative. If you're speaking to someone who's hurting, you'll need more gentleness. If you're speaking to a leader, perhaps more firmness. This dance of adaptation requires sensitivity and practice, but above all, it requires awareness of who you are. Because only those who know themselves can transform without losing themselves. Furthermore, adapting also means knowing when not to speak. Sometimes the best adjustment is silence. Listening more, feeling more, giving space for the other person to express themselves as well. In leadership communication, the key is not to talk more but to say the right thing at the right time with the right tone to the right person. And that can only be achieved if you are willing to observe before intervening, to feel before imposing, to adjust without losing yourself. Because there's a profound act of humility in this process. Because adapting your message means recognizing that your way isn't always the best way for everyone. It means stepping outside the ego of, "This is how I speak," and entering the awareness of, "How can I best reach you?" This gesture of empathy doesn't weaken you, it humanizes you. It doesn't make you less authentic, it makes you more effective. And in the end, that's what every leader seeks. Not just to be heard, but to be understood. Not just to impose ideas, but to generate impact. Adapting without losing your voice is an art cultivated with intention, and it transforms the way we influence the world. Because leading with words is, above all, an act of conscious connection. Chapter 12. The leader who listens first speaks better later. Listening is the most underrated art in leadership, and yet it's the foundation of all powerful communication. A true leader doesn't speak first to impose their will, but listens to understand, to gauge, to refine their message with emotional intelligence. Because when you listen attentively, you discover more than the words themselves convey. You pick up on the tone, the emotion, the pauses, the doubts, the contradictions. And in that invisible space lies the key to communicating with precision and power. It's not just about hearing, but about reading the other person, interpreting their needs, their fears, their expectations. And from there, crafting a response that not only informs, but transforms. Strategic listening means engaging your entire being. It means silencing the internal dialogue that drives you to respond quickly, to be right, to stand out, and creating space for the other person to fully exist in your attention. It means momentarily suspending judgment to allow for understanding. Because only when you truly listen can you speak with impact. A powerful response doesn't stem from impulse, it stems from understanding. When you know exactly what's troubling the other person, their pain point, or their hidden need, you can use your words like a key that unlocks inner doors. And that, in leadership, is pure gold. Furthermore, listening first gives you a strategic advantage. While others rush to speak and get lost in generalities, you are gathering valuable information. Every silence, every phrase, every nuance the other person shares is a clue for building a more relevant, more tailored, more persuasive message. Just as a surgeon doesn't act without a diagnosis, a good communicator doesn't throw words out randomly. First, they observe, feel, interpret, and then act with surgical precision. That is speaking with power, intervening when you have clarity, not when you are anxious. Some leaders believe their authority is demonstrated by talking more, interrupting, and dominating the conversation. But that only reveals insecurity. A true leader is one who can remain silent without losing presence. One who doesn't need to impress, but rather to understand. One who knows that a good question can be more powerful than a long explanation. One who understands that when you truly listen, the other person lowers their defenses, feels valued, and is more receptive to your message. Listening is, in itself, a silent yet powerful form of leadership. And there's a profound emotional dimension to this. Because listening validates. Listening gives dignity to the other person. Listening conveys respect. And when someone feels heard, they open up. They stop resisting. Then your words no longer feel like an invasion, but like an expected response. You no longer fight to enter. You're invited in. That's the magic of listening. It prepares the ground so your voice can resonate. Fertile ground where your ideas can grow and multiply because they were sown on understanding, not imposition. This applies in any context. A one-on-one conversation, a presentation to a team, a talk in front of hundreds of people. Even there you must listen first. Listen with your eyes, with your body, with empathy. Read the atmosphere, perceive the energy, sense if there is tension, enthusiasm, or apathy. Every audience speaks before you open your mouth. And your ability to read that invisible language will make the difference between connecting and simply speaking into thin air. It's not just about having a great message, but about knowing when and how to deliver it. And there's a key element. You don't listen to respond, you listen to understand. That difference changes everything. When you listen only to formulate your counterargument, you're at war. But when you listen to understand, you're building something. And only from that place can you construct a message that has a lasting impact. Because the power of your response will always depend on the quality of your listening. Accuracy isn't luck, it's emotional preparation. It's having understood the situation so well that every word you say lands perfectly. Listening also involves humility. The humility to recognize that you don't know everything, that the other person has pieces of the puzzle you need to see the whole picture. Listening is opening yourself up to the possibility of changing your approach, adjusting your message, enriching your vision. It's allowing the other person to influence you, not to lose yourself but to gain perspective. And that makes you wiser, more accurate, more human. Because no one follows someone who only wants to talk about themselves. We follow those who make us feel seen, understood, valued. Therefore, if you want to lead with words, begin by leading with your ears. Make listening your most powerful strategic tool. Observe more, ask more questions, interrupt less. And when you speak, do so from that space of deep connection that listening created. Then your words won't be mere noise, they'll be answers. They won't be mere phrases, they'll be bridges. And that's what a leader does with their voice. They don't fill spaces with words, they fill voids with meaning. Because those who listen first speak better afterward. And that's the secret of transformative leadership. Conclusion: speaking like a leader is speaking with purpose. Speaking like a leader isn't simply a set of vocal techniques or a collection of persuasive strategies. It's a profound commitment to purpose. Every word, every pause, every glance, every gesture must be aligned with the intention to build, mobilize, inspire, and transform. A true leader doesn't speak to shine, they speak to serve. They don't speak to be right, they speak to provoke thought. They don't seek to impress, they seek to positively influence. Because in the end, the true impact of your voice isn't measured by the applause you receive, but by the change you create in others. When a leader stands before an individual, a team, or a crowd, they bear the responsibility for something greater than themselves. They hold in their hands a powerful tool, words. And that tool can be used to uplift or to destroy, to sow hope or to instill fear, to unite or to divide. Therefore, the power of language should not be taken lightly. Speaking with purpose means having clarity in the message, connecting with the listener, and conviction in what is said. It means understanding that every word can ignite a spark or extinguish a flame. That every phrase has the potential to unlock ideas, heal wounds, or open new paths. True leadership isn't imposed through volume, but through intention. It doesn't stem from ego, but from vision. That's why a leader's voice doesn't shout, it guides. It doesn't dominate, it illuminates. It's a voice cultivated from within, honed by experience, tempered by humility, and strengthened by consistency. Because you can't lead with words if you don't lead by example. The congruence between what you say and what you do is what gives your communication real power. When words and actions go hand in hand, your message becomes indestructible. Speaking like a leader also means having the courage to say what others keep silent about. It means bringing what's important to the table, even if it's uncomfortable. It means raising your voice in times of injustice, chaos, and doubt, and providing clarity, direction, and truth. It means knowing when to be silent to listen and when to speak to transform. It means using communication not as a weapon of personal power, but as a vehicle for collective change. Because a leader doesn't speak just to be understood. They speak to awaken, to mobilize, to leave an emotional imprint that lasts beyond their presence. Don't forget that your voice isn't just a sound, it's energy. And that energy can move wills, open minds, and touch hearts. Every time you speak, you're shaping how others perceive you. You're projecting your worldview, your values, your intentions. And if you do so with authenticity, respect, clarity, and conviction, you'll build an authority that doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard. Because true vocal leadership transcends the stage, the position, or the microphone. It's the kind that leaves an inner resonance in those who hear you. A resonance that remains, that inspires, that transforms. So the next time you have to speak, ask yourself, what impact do I want to have? Why am I saying this? What does this person or group need to hear right now? How can I contribute something positive, healing, or constructive through my voice? Because that's the compass of a leader who communicates with purpose. That's the difference between speaking and leading. Between sounding loud and sounding genuine. Between impressing and transforming. Speaking like a leader isn't a goal, it's a daily practice. A conscious discipline. A way of being present. And every conversation, every meeting, every presentation is an opportunity to exercise that power. To be intentional, to be relevant, to be clear, to be helpful. And, above all, to be remembered not for what you said, but for how you made others feel. Because in the end, that's what defines a leader who communicates with power and authority. Their ability to touch minds, ignite hearts, and move action through their voice. May your voice never be noise, but an instrument of change. May your words not be just sound, but seeds of transformation. And may every time you speak like a true leader. So, if this audiobook inspired you and you're ready to delve deeper into your personal growth and inner transformation, I invite you to discover another eye-opening audiobook that will change the way you see the world, your decisions, and your potential. Click here and I'll see you there.